I have the privilege of having one of the attorneys on the defense team for President Donald Trump in the New York Alvin Bragg case. Will Scharf, thank you so much for joining me today.
Really great to be with you. Appreciate you having me on.
So this has been, I mean, you are a part of one of the biggest stories in history. And I think that you guys did everything you absolutely could in a system that seemed very rigged against you, the deck stacked against you, location, just all of the punches that they were taking. And yet Donald Trump rises in popularity, in money. So I want to get into that, but I want to go back to the beginning so that my audience understands. So District Attorney Alvin Bragg is leading the hunt against President Donald Trump. However, he originally passed on this case, then suddenly changed the law, made a misdemeanor a felony, etc. Why would Alvin Bragg change his mind? Or rather, is there somebody or a group behind Alvin Bragg that was pressuring him to bring this case?
Yeah, the timeline here is really important. I think you're asking exactly the right question. So this case was called the zombie case. The idea, the theory had sort of been around forever. Everybody passed on it. The federal authorities in New York, the Southern District of New York, declined to prosecute. The Federal Election Commission declined to take any action on this. Alvin Bragg's own office declined to bring this case, to the point where he had a number of assistant district attorneys quit. One of them, Mark Pomerantz, then wrote a book basically saying that it was terrible that Bragg wasn't bringing this case. Everything changes suddenly in November of 2022. So November of 2022, right after the midterm elections, Joe Biden is asked what he's going to do about the fact that President Trump is going to run for president again. And Biden, in a pretty shocking moment that went largely unnoticed at the time, said that he would use, quote unquote, legal means under the Constitution to prevent that from happening. What he was doing was obviously previewing the entire campaign of lawfare that we've since seen unfold against President Trump. So that was, I believe, November 9th, 2022. November 18th, 2022, less than 2 weeks later, Jack Smith is appointed the special counsel. That leads, obviously, to the two federal indictments. That same day, November 18th, 2022, Fani Willis's lover/prosecutor, Nathan Wade, is mysteriously checked into the White House counsel's office for 8 hours. And right around that same time, Matthew Colangelo, who's the acting number 3, the acting associate attorney general at the Department of Justice, at Biden's Department of Justice, one of the highest ranking legal officials in the country, quits his job, joins Bragg's office as an assistant district attorney. It's like a 4-star general quitting and enlisting in the National Guard as a private. And then just a couple months later, this case gets rushed in front of a grand jury and brought into court the spring and summer of 2023. So that's the timeline, and the timeline is really important. We believe, obviously, that this case was politically motivated, that it would have never been brought if President Trump wasn't running for president. And it's that political motivation that's infected these proceedings, I believe, really from the start.
Okay, wow, thank you. I want to hit back on some of those things, but as I've been researching, the name that keeps coming up is George Soros-backed district attorney, right? And I see this all across the country, but specifically in this case. But I'm also reading about groups Tide Foundation, Arabella, Attorney General Letitia James. Who are these other groups that are likely pushing money and pressure on this case?
So when you look at the institutional left, when you look at sort of all of the dark money that flows into left-wing causes and candidates around the country, I like to think of it as a big 3. You have the Soros Network, which is Open Society Foundation, a number of other groups associated with George Soros. Then you have the Tides Foundation, which is another one of these massive left-wing dark money networks. And then the third, which hasn't gotten much press attention until the last couple of years, is Arabella Advisors. Arabella is a consulting firm that controls 4 major left-wing nonprofit capital pools. They deploy over $1 billion a year in political capital around the country. 1630 Fund, New Venture Fund, a number of other groups associated with Arabella. These 3 groups typically work in concert. When you look at the crisis at the border, for example, you can tie money fueling that crisis back to Tides and back to Arabella. The Soros Foundation made a point, or the Soros Network made a point of funding these local district attorney races starting in 2016 and pushing these far left prosecutors into position in primarily blue, but also in some cases red states around the country. There are a number of reasons why they did that. So-called criminal justice reform, the sort of hug-a-thug, soft-on-crime policies are a big priority for them. I believe one of their key objectives, though, was having this leverage point against Republican politicians. So the same way that Rick Perry was prosecuted by a left-wing DA in Texas, Eric Greitens here in Missouri, former governor who was pushed out of office by a Soros-funded DA. I think that strain runs right through into Alvin Bragg, who received support from the Soros Network and his crusade against President Trump here.
Okay, wow. Okay, so there is a lot more going on behind the scenes than the average American would even guess.
And Alex Soros, who's now dating Huma Abedin, Hillary Clinton's aide and Anthony Weiner's ex-wife, he pops up in the White House all the time. I mean, you can track that in public visitor logs, public statements on Instagram. This is a guy who's deeply enmeshed with Joe Biden's political team, with Joe Biden's administration. So it's pretty tight-knit. And if you follow the money, you often arrive at an interesting place.
Well, is this the same Alex Soros that just took over the family business and is now instructing people to refer to Donald Trump, President Trump, as a convicted felon as often as possible? Every media, piece, same guy?
Yeah, same guy.
Okay.
Soros is perhaps even more liberal and far less accomplished son, who now unfortunately controls tens of billions of dollars, which is a scary scenario.
Yeah, that is. Okay, what do you think is going to be the next step? Because from my perspective, I have to imagine that these people desperately want to jail Trump, and yet they keep seeing the consequences of this lawfare as more popularity, more money in his re-election campaign. Is Judge Juan Merchan going to jail Donald Trump? Are you guys going to have time to appeal this? Is the Supreme Court going to step in and make a ruling? What's the next steps?
So I serve on President Trump's appellate team. We do appellate and constitutional litigation for him. We've been up to the Supreme Court a number of times now. I didn't serve on the trial team. So our role, basically, my team's role basically began the day that the jury verdict came down. I don't want to give away too much in the way of litigation strategy, but I will say that so we're ready to roll. We're looking to move this case as quickly as humanly possible. And I think ultimately truth and justice will be on President Trump's side here.
Okay. During the trial, I was keeping my people up to date on what you guys were doing, but one of the big stories that came out was from information dug up by independent journalist Laura Loomer on Judge Juan Merchan's daughter. Nearly every major player in the Democrat Party, as well as the loudest voices calling for him to be jailed, removed from ballots, kept off the campaign trail, they are all funneling money towards this judge's daughter in the form of consulting fees, most of which is going, being mailed directly to their houses. Is this going to be investigated? Can this be a part of your appeals process, or is this something that needs to be investigated on the congressional level?
Yeah, Laura's an incredible digger. I mean, the stuff that she finds that the mainstream media somehow misses, it never ceases to amaze me. In terms of Judge Merchan, I mean, we moved to recuse him at the outset of at the outset of this case, we believe he's irretrievably conflicted for a number of reasons. First of all, in violation of New York Code of Conduct, he contributed money to Joe Biden in 2020. Not only is that a problem in and of itself, but the fact that he contributed money to defeat just a few years ago, it's got to be unprecedented in American history. I've never heard of anything like that. And then, as you noted, his daughter is a major Democrat fundraiser who stands to make potentially millions of dollars if President Trump is convicted. Under New York law, we believe that presents an irretrievable conflict of interest. And I think Judge Merchan should have recused. That's an issue that we've already raised. That's an issue we'll continue to raise. And we think it's an important issue on appeal. Obviously, if Judge Merchan were to have recused, I believe this would have been a very different trial. And if a court were to rule that that was a mistake of his, that staying on this case when he shouldn't have, that could potentially reverse the entire verdict here. So it's a situation that we're following closely.
You're running for office, so you understand the importance of having things run smoothly. Do you think that this sentencing date of July 11th was strategic? Because a few days later, Trump is supposed to be at the RNC, basically being officially given the nomination as the Republican presidential candidate. Is this all very purposeful?
You know, I don't think there are coincidences in politics, or at least certainly most coincidences in politics aren't coincidental. It's not an abnormal time period between verdict and sentencing that we're seeing here. But I think the timing of this entire trial was designed to interfere with the election on the understanding that if a verdict were returned, that sentencing and that the appeals from that verdict would be going on at the height of campaign season. I mean, this is a case that relates to conduct that occurred primarily in 2017, also in 2016 to an extent. This case could have been brought at any time after President Trump left the White House. And instead, as I mentioned before, it sat and sat and sat, and then they suddenly rushed it into court really right as the presidential election season was kicking off. And then they rushed it to trial right as President Trump was, being acclaimed as the Republican nominee, right as he was starting to win primaries. So I think the timing of this entire proceeding is highly suspect, and sentencing being just a couple days before the RNC is a great example of that.
Okay. I'm not a lawyer. The only time I've dealt with them is when they've had to help me with my own businesses. But you said on CNN that this case is replete with reversible errors and will be aggressively appealed. What does that mean? Replete with reversible errors?
So a reversible error is an error that occurs, let's say, during a trial. That if it were deemed to be an error on appeal, that would lead to a reversal of the judgment. So when you look at a case like this, the sorts of things that we're talking about are constitutional errors in the way that the case was handled. Judge Merchan's decision to essentially allow the jury to not be unanimous on elements of the offense charged would be an example of that. Judge Merchan's failure to recuse would be an example of that. Some of his evidentiary decisions, allowing some evidence to come in, denying us a mistrial after some of that evidence came in, refusing to allow us to call a number of witnesses in the way that we wanted. Each of these would be an error that could lead to a reversal of the entire judgment. And typically, as an appellate lawyer, you hunt through the record to find your one hook, your one error that could get a judgment thrown out. Here, we almost have a wealth of riches, that there are so many things that happened during this trial that were just so highly irregular that we would be hopeful that even with, relatively left-leaning appellate courts in New York, that they would see this trial for what it was, which was, a sham, which was just a trial that was not conducted the way a normal criminal trial would be. So that's what I meant by that. That's sort of legalese for there were a ton of things that went really, really wrong, and this judgment should be thrown out. Okay,
thank you. I appreciate you clarifying that. We weren't in the room, but the day that Michael Cohen's former attorney testified, and Judge Merchan has this blow up, kicks everybody out of court, doesn't really allow one of Trump's best witnesses against Michael Cohen's testimony and character. Was that as dramatic as the media made it sound? Like, from my perspective, it seemed like it was a very dramatic, this judge like throwing a fit, kicking everybody out of court. Was that as dramatic as the media led us to believe?
Yes.
Okay.
No, so I was in court that day. You know, you have to understand sort of the setting. So Michael Cohen testified to a whole bunch of things. His former attorney, Bob Costello, who's a very serious guy. You know, he was a federal prosecutor in New York for many years, highly experienced lawyer. Costello was prepared to testify that many things that Cohen had said were just outright lies. Typically, when you're presenting a defense in a criminal trial, that sort of evidence, impeachment evidence, you have a lot of leeway in how to present it, and there's a lot of leeway in what can come in. That a lot of the usual rules of evidence are relaxed when you're dealing with impeachment of a prior witness, especially for the defense. Judge Merchan made a number of rulings that I believe were just blatantly incorrect, limiting the scope of what Costello would be allowed to testify to. Costello then gave some answers that Judge Merchan didn't like. He sustained some evidentiary objections. Costello, who's a highly experienced trial lawyer, who knows how these sorts of things are supposed to proceed, was, I believe, sort of mystified by what Judge Merchan was doing. And that led to almost palpable tension between him and the judge as things proceeded. Judge Merchan then essentially cleared the courtroom, kicked the media out, while he told him that this is my courtroom, I'll conduct things how I want, and you know, excoriated his conduct. And then things cooled down after that. But you know, I've been practicing law for a while now. I've never seen anything like that, you know, certainly in my time in court.
Yeah, it was almost like something out of a movie. Like, are you looking at me? Are you staring at me? It was like, but you know, we weren't allowed inside to see. And so I was like, okay, is this being blown out of proportion, or did this judge actually throw a giant fit after, you know, maybe somebody who was in a similar circumstance, you know, is seeing this thing for what it really was?
Yeah, it was, you know, it was a very interesting moment. And again, I would focus on Judge Merchan's evidentiary ruling here. From an appellate perspective, that's what we would focus on. That limiting Costello's testimony the way that he did, not allowing the jury to hear from this guy who had pretty damning information, rebutting a lot of what Michael Cohen had just testified to. That was highly irregular in my view. And I think, again, that's one of these reversible errors. That's something we would look to challenge aggressively on appeal, because that's not usually the way these sorts of things play out in court.
Yeah. Okay. Just so I understand, you said that you were on Trump's appellate team.
Yeah, I work with a great team of lawyers, primarily out here in Missouri, actually. And we deal with appellate issues for President Trump across a number of these cases. So, for example, when we were up at the Supreme Court in April, arguing over presidential immunity, that was me and my colleagues, John Sauer and Michael Talent, that handled that. The E. Jean Carroll cases, which are now up on appeal, we played a big role in that. The appeal of the Letitia James case, the New York civil case. And we've helped out with briefing and motions with really all the other criminal lawyers who were working on President Trump's cases.
Okay. I was trying to understand where, like, Alina Habba comes in and you, and so these are like different teams that have different focuses for President Trump.
Yeah, that's basically right. Alina's a good friend and a colleague, and we've worked on a number of these cases in close coordination with her and her law firm. Appellate lawyers are kind of the backroom nerds, whereas trial lawyers sort of have more of a flair for the dramatic and the flamboyant. So it's just a different focus. But we write briefs and motions and then argue appeals, basically.
Okay, interesting. Okay, I'm trying to help myself and my audience, which I don't believe are legal scholars, understand all of this. One thing that I wanted to understand is, how was Michael Cohen during a trial and before and after, able to go on TV and TikTok every night and badmouth President Trump, share details about the case, his personal hatred. But Trump's not able to say anything. It seems like the situation is really rigged in favor of Michael Cohen versus Donald Trump. And now Michael Cohen's just in the last couple of days is on TV and social media saying that if Trump is allowed back in office, he's going to drop his enemies off buildings on their heads. Like, what is up with this guy? His credibility for me is like completely thrown out the door.
Yeah, I mean, that was the craziest thing about this gag order that Judge Merchan entered against us at the outset of the case, that, you know, Stormy Daniels and Michael Cohen are going on TV or going on social media every night, slamming the president, talking about the case, and yet President Trump wasn't able to respond. I mean, gag orders, as Judge Merchan himself said, they're supposed to be a shield, not a sword. The idea is to protect the integrity of the proceedings. Well, Michael Cohen and Stormy Daniels were doing far more to attack the integrity of the proceedings than anything we were doing, and yet they were never subject to a gag order. They never had any limitations placed on their speech. Meanwhile, President Trump, who's the leading candidate for president in the United States, isn't able to speak openly about matters of tremendous public importance, including this campaign of lawfare against him. Michael Cohen, you know, I was there in the courtroom when he admitted to stealing tens of thousands of dollars from the Trump organization while he was on the stand at trial. I've never seen a witness essentially confess to grand larceny and bank fraud, uncharged grand larceny and bank fraud while on the stand in a criminal proceeding. I mean, this is a guy, Todd Blanche said it best during his closing argument, you know, President Trump's lead trial counsel. I mean, this guy is the greatest liar of all time, as he is the gloat. And I thought his credibility was, you know, totally shot. I guess this New York jury may have felt a little bit differently. But again, there are just a lot of issues with the way that Cohen's testimony came in, the sorts of things he was allowed to testify to, you know, unrelated, uncharged conduct. These are things that normally would be kept out of a trial, but in this case were allowed in. And that's, you know, another issue that we would look to challenge on appeal.
Yeah, from my outside perspective, it was almost like, okay, wait a minute. I'm losing people's trust that I'm a truth teller because I've lied and perjured myself and gone to jail for that. Oh, I know. I'll admit to stealing tens of thousands of dollars in order to restore my credibility as a truth teller.
It was a crazy moment. I was sitting next to a pretty prominent lawyer. I won't, you know, use his name here. While that was happening in the gallery in court. And I just passed him a note that said, you know, have you ever seen a witness confess to grand larceny and bank fraud uncharged while on the stand? And we both just started laughing. I mean, it was just an absurd moment. And there were so many absurd moments like that during this trial. You know, you listen to Joe Biden, you listen to Alvin Bragg. They want to convince the American people that this was just a totally normal proceeding. Nothing to see here. This is just how it works. At every stage of these proceedings, everything was highly abnormal. And it just speaks to, you know, what I know you talk about, the politicization of law enforcement, the politicization of prosecution, the misuse of our courts for this campaign of lawfare. And I think some of those Michael Cohen moments really demonstrated that pretty well.
Yeah. So in our final minutes here together, you are running for Attorney General in the great state of Missouri. What are some of the big issues that you're seeing in your state that need your expertise, that need to be cleaned up? Help us understand what's going on in Missouri.
So, you know, Missouri is a very interesting state. It's a deep, deep red state. It went for President Trump by 19 points in 2016. We have supermajorities in our legislature. Every statewide office holders are Republican. And yet we've been totally unsuccessful at getting big, bold, conservative stuff done. You know, we don't look like a Florida or a Texas or even an Arkansas. And the people of Missouri, sort of the conservative grassroots, the folks that we talk to, are just really frustrated by this. I mean, we have Republican government, but our streets are overrun with crime. They're peddling woke garbage in our schools. You know, we've got a marijuana dispensary on every corner. I mean, is this what Republican government is supposed to look like? And there's really been this upsurge of grassroots conservative sentiment in the last couple of years that we just need to break the stranglehold that, special interests and lobbyists and these political insiders have over our state. It's not even necessarily a Republican versus Democrat issue. It's an establishment versus outsider issue. So we've been all over the state. I've driven, over 43,000 miles as of this morning so far during this race. And everywhere we go, people are just fed up. President Trump talks about the swamp in Washington, D.C. I think we have a real problem with a kind of mini swamp in Jefferson City, our state capital. And that's really what we're looking to fix. That's what we're looking to do here, is just bring bold conservative voices into government and start breaking down this sort of special interest stranglehold that I think's really done serious damage to our state for far too long.
Okay. Yeah. Well, we, in order for red states to stay strong, they need great leadership. So I'm hoping really good things for you. Final question. Do you think that these cases that you've been helping President Trump through, do you actually think that they have made him more relatable to more Americans than he was before, where it's broken down that he is just a normal American fighting for good American values, and the legal system is just trying to chew him up, spit him out, keep him off the campaign trails? What are your thoughts on that?
I think the American people love a fair fight and hate an unfair fight. I think the American people have an almost visceral disdain for unfairness. We want a level playing field. We want people to have opportunities. We want people to have the opportunity to succeed. And I think what they're seeing with all these cases is an attempt to rig the political deck by the Biden administration and their allies. And I think there's been just this visceral response to that people absolutely hate it. Folks understand that President Trump that none of these prosecutions would be happening if he weren't running for president. And I think it's that dynamic that the American people are rejecting. That's why the day of this conviction, the day of the jury verdict, President Trump smashed fundraising records up and down the line. I think in the 72 hours after that jury verdict, they raised like $300 million. That's why his poll numbers have never been higher, that the American people are just rejecting these attempts at essentially election cheating by the Biden administration and their allies. So I think there is a degree of relatability that comes with the fact that, President Trump is just constantly under attack. But I think the American people also understand that the reason he's under attack is because he's fighting for them, that because his agenda is different than Joe Biden, different than the political establishments, that's why they're coming after him. And I think that's why his support keeps rising, not falling, that the American people love a fighter.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. They love a fighter, but they hate an unfair fight. And that's exactly what we've been witnessing. Thank you so much for everything that you've been doing for the country, for the former president. If people want to learn more about your campaign in Missouri and be supportive of you, where can I point traffic towards?
Yeah, our website is votescharf.com, votescharf.com. And you can find me on social media, X, Truth Social, Instagram, Facebook, just at Will Scharf.
Okay. I'll put links to all of that down below. Thank you so much for coming on. I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Yeah, really great to be with you. Thanks for having me.